In the great halls of the Terran Crown Palace, Queen Eleanor sat alone on her throne. The walls shone with lights that looked like falling stars, but the room felt cold and heavy. She was young, but carried a heavy crown that weighed more on her heart than her head. The Empire needed peace. War had taken too many lives and left too many broken homes. At the borders of the Empire, noble houses kept fighting for power. To end the disputes, her council said she must marry. Eleanor did not marry for love. She married for duty. She agreed to marry Captain Aaron Blake, a man known for his loyalty and calm strength. He was not a nobleman, not of royal blood. He was a soldier born from a quiet coastal town on Earth. He had served in the Stellar Fleet for many years and had seen the dark side of war. His face held the stillness of a man who had seen too much and survived only by keeping his heart strong and silent. When Aaron stood beside her for the first time, Eleanor studied him with careful eyes. His posture was straight and his voice low. He spoke only when needed, and every word was measured. He did not try to win her affection, as the other noble suitors had. He simply looked at her with a calm respect that seemed strange in a palace full of pride and gossip. She thought him dull at first, useful for duty, nothing more. The marriage announcement drew every important person in the capital to the palace. Long tables were set, wine flowed, songs were played, and the people cheered for their new queen and her captain husband. Beneath the smiles and joy, Eleanor heard whispers. The nobles said she could have done better. Some laughed that she married a soldier to keep peace, not realizing that this soldier was worth more than 10 princes. Aaron never answered their whispers. He stood beside her like a silent wall of strength. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor began to notice things about him that others missed. He woke early every morning, even before sunrise, to walk the training fields with the soldiers. He checked the guard watch by himself, listened to the stories of common soldiers, and always remembered their names. When he was not with her, he studied reports on the Empire's defenses and learned about repairs needed in the old fleets. He was not highborn, but his sense of duty was royal in its own way. At first, Eleanor wondered if he secretly wished for more power, but Aaron never asked for favors. He did not use his position to demand riches or titles. When she spoke, he listened carefully. When she was tired and silent, he stood nearby quietly, not demanding words but sharing silence with her. Slowly, she began to look forward to his presence. His calm steadiness gave her breath when the court's noise became too much. One evening, as rain fell softly on the marble walls of the palace, Eleanor sat near the tall window. The city lights below looked like scattered jewels. Aaron entered the hall, his cloak damped from the rain. "You should not be out there alone," she said gently. "I was checking the west gates," he replied. "The guards needed changes in their schedule. It is done now." He stood beside her, looking out at the silent city. The rain fell between them. Then Eleanor said something she had not planned to say. "How do you stay so calm, Captain? The Empire feels ready to fall apart some days." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried weight and memory. "I learned long ago, Your Majesty, that calm is the only shield we can always carry. When fear rules us, we lose more than the fight. We lose ourselves." His words stayed with her long after he walked away. From that night, she began to see him not only as a man bound by duty, but as one shaped by quiet fire. In council rooms, she listened to his short, clear answers as ministers argued about numbers and politics. He saw what others missed. His thoughts were sharp, but never cruel. When a fire broke out in one of the spaceport factories, Aaron led the rescue teams by himself, while others debated how to respond. When the news reached her, she understood what kind of man she had married. Their marriage started as a decision signed in ink and sealed by tradition. But every day showed her more of the man behind the uniform. He was not charming, not poetic, not ambitious in the way nobles were. Yet he cared about people, about fairness, about doing what was right, even when it cost him rest. Eleanor did not yet love him, but in the quiet corners of her heart, she began to trust him. She saw that under his simple uniform and soldier's face lived a spirit larger than she had imagined. The Empire had given her a husband of duty, but she was beginning to see that duty had its own kind of greatness. And somewhere deep inside her, though she did not say it aloud, she felt the first spark of something stronger than respect. It was small, quiet, almost hidden, but it was real. Months passed after the wedding, and peace in the Empire began to tremble like thin glass in a storm. Far away in the outer colonies, a rebellion started. Men who once served the crown now refused to obey its laws. They took ships, attacked trade routes, and claimed that they would never kneel to the queen again. The council in the palace argued for days. Some wanted to send envoys. Others wanted to send armies. Queen Eleanor listened to them all, but her heart grew heavier with each word. Aaron Blake stood quietly during these meetings. His uniform was plain, his eyes thoughtful. When the shouting grew louder, he finally spoke. "Your Majesty, we cannot wait for another attack. It will strike again, harder next time. Let me lead a fleet to the colonies. Let me end this before it spreads." The room fell silent. The council did not like the idea. They thought he was too bold. Some said the queen's husband should not risk his life like a common soldier. Others whispered that he was trying to gain fame. But Eleanor saw something pure in his expression. He was not hungry for glory. He was simply ready to protect. That night in her private study, Eleanor met Aaron again. The rain outside struck the glass like steady drumming. She looked up from the reports and asked softly, "You really wish to go?" "Yes," he said. "This rebellion will not end with words. The people there follow strong leaders, but they are tired of pain. If we fight, I will end it quickly, not cruelly. We can rebuild peace if it's stopped now." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. His face was calm, his eyes steady. "You may go," she said. "But promise me one thing. Come back." He hesitated, then nodded once. "For the crown, for home." Those simple words touched her more than she expected. She wanted to ask if home meant her, but before she could speak, he saluted and left the room. When Aaron's fleet lifted off the next morning, the city gathered in silence to watch. The sky was pale and cold. White vapors trailed behind the ships as they rose higher and higher until they disappeared beyond the clouds. Eleanor stood on the royal balcony, watching until the last trace of light faded. Days turned to weeks, and then to months. News from the frontier traveled slowly. At first there were reports of small victories, then nothing. Ministers in the council chamber began to murmur that perhaps Aaron's mission had failed. Some suggested sending another commander. Eleanor listened to them with a face as cold as marble, but inside she feared what they said might be true. She spent long nights walking through the palace halls thinking of the man she used to call a stranger. She remembered his quiet strength and how he never boasted about anything. She remembered the way he listened more than he spoke. "He will not fall," she whispered to herself more than once, though she could not be sure whether she believed it or only needed to. Then one foggy evening, a signal came. A messenger ran into the throne room, breathless, holding a data chip. Eleanor stood from her chair so quickly that her crown almost slipped. "From Captain Blake," the man said. She took the small device with trembling fingers, placed it into the reader, and waited. The projection shimmered, broken by static. Then Aaron's image appeared, worn and pale but alive. Behind him were damaged steel walls and sparks from broken wires. His voice cracked through the noise. "Your Majesty, the colonies are free. We have taken the rebel ships, or joined them, under our command. The systems are united again. The crown still stands, and so do we." For a moment, Eleanor could not speak. She stared at the fading light of the message, her eyes filling before she could stop them. The ministers cheered when they heard the full report. They called him a genius, a hero, maybe even a miracle. Eleanor said nothing. She walked to the balcony and looked out at the night sky. It was there, somewhere distant among the stars, that the man she once married for duty had turned into something far greater. In the weeks that followed, stories began to spread across the Empire. Soldiers who fought under Aaron told strange tales of battles won through impossible tactics. They said he used the enemy's mistakes as weapons, that he saved whole fleets from traps by predicting moves no one could see coming. Some said his calm voice alone could steady a panicked crew. Others said he fought with a light in his eyes that made people believe they could not lose. When he finally sent word that he was returning, the city prepared like never before. Every street was lined with people, Every child carried a small flag. When his ship descended, slow and glowing in the sunlight, people cried out his name with joy. As Aaron stepped down onto the landing platform, Eleanor was there waiting. He looked changed. His uniform was burnt in places, and his hands bore marks of hard labor. Words were not needed. In his eyes, she saw all the storms he had faced, and something else, a quiet devotion that no oath could ever promise. The crowd cheered around them, but in that moment, it was only the two of them under the warm sunlight. She had married him for duty, but now she saw him clearly not a soldier. Not a politician, but a man who had carried the spirit of humanity through fire and returned stronger than ever. The night Aaron returned from the colonies, the city did not sleep. Bells rang across the capital. Lights glowed from every window. People called his name, smiling, singing in the streets. Queen Eleanor stood on the palace balcony, watching the celebration, but her thoughts were far away. She could still see his face as he stepped off the ship, tired but unbroken. When the crowd finally grew quiet and the last songs faded, she sent for him. They met in her private chamber, without guards or court advisors. The only sound was the wind pressing softly against the tall glass doors. Aaron entered slowly, his posture still straight despite the exhaustion that clung to him like ash. "You should rest," Eleanor said quietly. "I will. After the reports are finished," he answered. "There is rebuilding to plan. The colonies need supplies. The people trust us again, but we must not forget how thin that trust is." She watched him as he spoke, noticing the bruises at the edge of his jaw, the scar along his wrist. "You speak as if you are still out there," she said. "You do not have to fight anymore, Aaron." He smiled faintly. "Fighting is not always with weapons, my queen." She wanted to argue, to tell him to stop carrying the weight of the empire on his shoulders. But she saw in his eyes that he would not easily change. His heart was built from duty. And yet, while listening to his calm voice, she felt a warmth beneath her ribs that frightened her a little. In the next weeks, Aaron spent long hours meeting officers and engineers. He helped repair ships, inspect soldiers, and calm governors who feared losing their power. He moved through every hall of the government like a quiet storm, gentle in speech, unstoppable in purpose. People began to call him the shield of the crown. Eleanor found herself looking for him at every meeting. When he wasn't there, she missed his voice among the noise of politics. He never raised it, but when he spoke, the room listened. She began to notice how ministers hesitated before arguing against him. His calm confidence seemed to reach everything around him. When troubles rose, he had already thought of 3 ways to solve them. He was becoming more than a soldier, was becoming a symbol. One evening, he came to see her with a message from the outer colonies. "They want to meet with you," he said. "Their leaders wish to speak face to face." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Then we will go," she answered. Together, the journey took several days. Their ship crossed silent stretches of space, where stars hung like frozen embers. During the flight, they spoke more than they ever had before. Eleanor told him about her childhood, about being raised to lead before she had even learned what freedom meant. Aaron listened, his expression soft. When she finished, he said, "You learned duty before you learned choice. It makes your rule strong, but it must also feel lonely." "It does," she admitted. "Sometimes I envy those who can live simply." He turned to the dark window where the stars reflected against the glass. Simplicity is not freedom either. People who live simply still carry the world's burdens, only in smaller ways. For the first time in a long while, she smiled. "You always make me think too much." "It is better than feeling too little," he said, and she laughed, a quiet, honest laugh that surprised them both. When they arrived, the leaders of the colonies met them with cautious respect. Aaron stood behind the queen during the talks, silent but steady. Every time the discussion grew tense, one glance from him seemed to calm the room. Eleanor managed to sign a peace agreement that would bring trade and shared defense between the crown and the colonies. It was a victory not won by blood, but by trust slowly rebuilt. That night, as the ship carried them home, Eleanor stood in the observation room, looking out at the stars. Aaron joined her quietly. "The empire will heal," he said. "It will take time, but it will heal. She looked up at him. You speak as if you already know the future? He smiled slightly. Only know that humans can rise after any fall. If we learn, if we keep faith, we can be more than what we were before. Eleanor was silent for a moment. You believe that strongly? Yes, he said. Yeah. I've seen men change in the middle of battle. Because hope would not let them die. That is what makes us what we are. We are not perfect, but we keep standing. She looked at him, his face lit by starlight, and she realized how deeply his belief ran. It wasn't pride, it was something pure, something she had never seen in any nobleman or general. She whispered, Then maybe you were meant to lead more than an army, Aaron. Maybe you were meant to lead hearts. He did not answer, only lowered his head slightly in respect. When they returned to Earth, crowds filled the streets again. But this time, the cheers were as much for the Queen as for her commander. Together, they had brought peace where no one dared hope for it. As Aaron walked beside her through the roaring celebration, Eleanor felt a strange certainty. The man she had married to save a throne had become the one who gave that throne meaning. And though no words of love were spoken between them, something unbreakable connected them, born not from duty, but from shared strength and quiet faith. The years after the colony's peace were calm at first, and the people of the empire started to rebuild their homes. Markets opened again, children went back to schools, and trade ships filled the skies. Queen Eleanor ruled with fairness, always listening to her people, yet rumors of danger never fully disappeared. At the far edge of the empire, near the Dawn sector, reports of trouble began. Merchants spoke of ships attacked in the dark, of unknown fleets stealing supplies and vanishing like shadows. Eleanor listened to these reports with a worried heart. She remembered the days before the rebellion and feared that history might be repeating itself. In the council meeting one morning, she turned to Aaron Blake, now High Commander of the Royal Fleet. His hair had grown a little gray at the edges, but his eyes still carried the same calm strength. "They are testing us again," she said quietly. Aaron nodded. "Yes. We must act before they grow confident." The ministers debated as they always did, arguing about numbers, budgets, and risks. Aaron never raised his voice, but when he spoke, all noise fell away. "If we do nothing, more lives will be lost. Send me to the Dawn sector. We'll end this before it spreads." Eleanor's hands tightened around the arms of her chair. She had let him go once before and had waited through endless nights with fear pressing against her chest. Now he was ready to leave again, and though her heart wanted to keep him safe, her mind knew he was right. "That region is dangerous," she said. "The last fleet that went there was destroyed." "I know," he answered. "But fear will take more from us than any battle. Let me go." After a long silence, she nodded, her voice low. "Then go, but take my faith with you." Aaron smiled at her words, a gentle smile that spoke more than promises. "And I will bring it back with victory," he said. Within days, his fleet launched from Earth's main port. The massive ships rose through the clouds and disappeared into the silver sky. As Eleanor watched them go, she felt the same ache she had felt before, a mix of pride and fear. The Dawn sector was chaos. Pirate fleets, broken militias, and desperate bands of scavengers filled the dark space lanes. These people were not united by a cause, but by hunger and greed. They saw the royal fleet as another target. But Aaron did not fight them with rage. He fought them with thought. His first action was not attack, but mercy. He saved the crews of stranded ships, offered them food, and gave them a chance to join his cause. "You can fight against something that will destroy you," he told them. "Or you can fight for something that will keep you alive." Slowly, they began to choose him. When battles finally came, his strategies amazed everyone. He used gravity fields to confuse enemy scanners, guided his ships through storms that others feared, and struck from directions they thought impossible. His officers watched in silence as he turned defeat into victory again and again. They began to believe he could see more than others saw, that his mind could read the rhythm of war itself. Back on Earth, Eleanor waited for word. The nights grew cold and long. Every message that arrived made her heart pause before she opened it. Some brought good news, others brought lists of names, the fallen, the wounded. But through it all, Aaron's reports remained calm and steady. "The sector is bending, not broken," he wrote once. "Soon light will reach even its darkest corners." Months later, the war ended. Aaron's fleet returned, slower than before, battered but alive. The people filled the streets once more to welcome them home. This time, there were more tears of relief than cheers of victory. When Aaron stepped down from his ship, Eleanor went to him without the formality of the court. He looked aged from the exhaustion, but even stronger within. The crowd watched in silence as their queen stood before him. "You did it again," she said. "You saved him." He bowed his head. "We all did. Every person who carried hope out there saved someone." She studied him for a long time, then said softly, "You risked everything for them. You always do." Aaron looked at her, his eyes calm and endless. "When we stop risking for others, we lose what makes us human." That night, when the celebrations ended, Eleanor walked through the quiet halls of the palace. She found Aaron alone in the corridor of honor, where the names of fallen soldiers were carved into the walls. He was tracing the letters with his hand, reading each name slowly. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Does it ever grow easier?" He shook his head. "No, and it should not." Something in his answer filled her with both sadness and pride. She stepped closer and placed her hand gently on his arm. "Then you carry them well," she whispered. For a long moment, they stood together in silence. The palace was still except for the distant hum of engines. Eleanor thought of how strange fate was. Once she had married this man only to keep peace between noble houses. Now, she saw that his heart held the kind of honor no crown or title could command. As they stood there, she realized what true strength looked like. It was not in power, not in winning wars, but in enduring pain and remaining kind. She knew then that history would remember Aaron. Blake not just as a soldier or hero, but as the man who reminded humanity what it meant to rise after every fall. Many years passed, and the Empire entered an age of great peace. The people called it the Age of Ascension, when wars grew rare and cities shone with prosperity. New schools opened, new fleets were built for exploration instead of battle, and children learned not only about glory, but also about honor. At the center of it all stood Queen Eleanor and High Commander Aaron Blake. Now older but still side by side, guiding their people with calm hearts, Aaron had become more than a soldier. To the armies, he was a teacher. To the citizens, he was a living legend. Cadets told each other stories about his battles, his calm courage, and the way he never gave up on anyone. Some even whispered that no enemy could defeat him because he fought not for pride, but for something greater. Gada! They called him the battle god of humanity, though he always refused that title. One morning, Eleanor stood on the grand balcony of the palace, watching the sun rise above the shining towers. The city below glowed like gold. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Aaron walking toward her in his old uniform. His steps were slow now, his hair touched with silver, but his presence still carried the same quiet strength as before. "You still wear that uniform?" she said softly, smiling. He glanced down. "It still fits. And it reminds me who I am." "And who is that?" she asked. He looked out at the sunrise. Just a man who once promised to stand beside his queen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The light touched their faces, warm and gentle. So much had changed, yet between them, the silence was still peaceful. Aaron spent his days advising the young officers at the academy. He taught them how to read maps, how to lead others, how to make choices that would save lives. But more important than his lessons in war were his lessons in humanity. He told them, strength means nothing if it does not protect the innocent. A victory that costs kindness is not a victory at all. The students listened to his quiet words more carefully than they listened to the long speeches of other teachers. Eleanor often visited these classes and stood unseen at the back, watching. She saw how every cadet sat straighter when Aaron entered, how they followed his calm gestures with respect. It gave her hope. The future was safe in their hands, shaped by his example. At night, when the palace lights went dim, Eleanor and Aaron would walk together in the gardens. They rarely spoke about war anymore. Instead, they talked about life, about memories, and sometimes about what humanity could become in the centuries ahead. "Do you think the world will remember us?" she asked one evening as they watched the moon rise. Aaron answered, "They might, but if they remember kindness and courage more than our names, then we will have done enough." She smiled at that. You always speak as if you already know what time will choose to keep. I only know what time cannot erase, he replied. The good we build lasts longer than any stone wall or crown. Months later, the council decided to honor him with a ceremony. They wanted to unveil a monument in his name at the Fleet Academy, a statue of the commander who had saved the Empire. Aaron tried to refuse. Statues are for kings and myths, he said, not for men who simply did their duty. But Eleanor insisted. This is not for you alone, she told him. It is for those who will come after. They must see what human will can become. At the ceremony, the crowd filled the great square. When the curtain fell and the bronze figure was revealed, silence spread for a moment. It showed Aaron in his old armor, standing tall but not proud, his hand resting on a sword pointed toward the ground, a symbol, not of victory, but of peace. Aaron looked up at it and sighed softly. I hope they understand, he murmured. Eleanor stood beside him. They will. You've taught them well. Years continued to pass. The two of them grew older, their steps slower. The palace became quieter, their meetings fewer, but their bond remained unchanged. One winter night, as snow fell softly outside, Aaron sat by the fire, writing his final thoughts for the next generation of commanders. The power of humanity, he wrote, is not in how many battles it wins, but in how often it rises when it falls. When Eleanor found those words the next morning, she felt a deep calm settle over her. She looked out the window where the snow covered the gardens and whispered, You kept your promise, Aaron. You never stopped standing beside your queen. From that day onward, his teaching spread everywhere. Children repeated his sayings, scholars wrote about his strategies, and artists painted his quiet face. People still prayed to his memory before every great endeavor. Not as to a god, but to a man who showed what human strength truly meant. Eleanor ruled for many more years, and whenever she stood on the balcony under the stars, she could almost feel that calm presence near her again. She knew he had never really left her, because a heart that loved and protected as purely as his never fades from the world. And so the story of Aaron Blake lived on, not just as a legend told around fires, but as a living truth carried in every soul that refused to surrender. For in the end, the queen who had once married for duty saw that duty itself had turned into love, and that love had created something eternal.